Hey, Chair Ferguson, I just want to understand, and maybe you can speak to it in terms of just the way the public's supposed to think about it. I think there's some folks in the business community who look at some of the decisions or things that are going on and look at them as political. I know it's not your jurisdiction. I think it's the FCC that's looking at the Paramount transaction, for example, and this 60 Minutes piece and whether there should be a settlement or not. But how should people think about sort of these political elements, which historically I don't think were necessarily, though maybe you'd argue they were, considered in the overall, decision to pursue these transactions or not?
Yeah, President Trump appointed me to enforce the laws and to enforce them without fear or favor. My own view is the politics are all beside the point. My job is to protect Americans from monopoly and to protect Americans from fraud. And I don't care about the politics of the companies involved. I care about protecting ordinary Americans as consumers and as workers from fraud and from monopoly. And so that's what I'm going to do. Politics all aside, that's my job, is enforce the law, enforce them fairly and without regard to politics.
Is that a Lena Khan
Let me ask you this.
monopoly
Do you see consolidation?
An monopoly?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry. Is that a Lena Khan monopoly or an actual monopoly?
That's a monopoly as the antitrust laws understand it. I have no ideological predisposition against merger and acquisition activity. It's part of how the economy grows. But I do have a strong ideological preference for vigorous enforcement of the antitrust laws. I don't want to fall asleep at the wheel and allow monopolies to, raise everyone's prices, deprive us of innovation, to make our economy less dynamic. But look, I see it as my job to enforce the laws and win in court. And if I can't win in court, the FTC needs to get out of the way and let business innovate for all Americans.
And what you said in that room of CEOs earlier this week was so fascinating to me, because if I'm understanding it correctly, you see consolidation of large corporate power as potentially threatening to sort of Americans' liberty, in a sense of, big corporations can have a social agenda that you don't agree with on whether that's vaccines or masks or Black Lives Matter issues. That's something that you see as potentially threatening to Americans. Can you explain that?
Yeah, look, go back to 2020. If you had a view on masks that was inconsistent with how big tech felt about masks, you weren't allowed to talk about it. If you had a view on vaccines, couldn't talk about it. If you thought that changing election laws in the middle of an election was unfair, you weren't allowed to talk about it. But it wasn't just big tech censorship. That was a huge problem. Consumers couldn't go into a store without having political messages pushed in their face. And I'm sitting in 2020 working in the Senate going, gosh, if companies feel like they can alienate half of their consumer base without suffering any real competitive consequences, we probably have a competition problem. But that's what I care about, is competition. It's not the political messaging itself. That's not my job. My job is to protect Americans from the abuse of market power. And if market power makes it possible for companies to censor or to push a social agenda that is really alienating to Americans, I care about the market power, not the message. That's my job as an antitrust enforcer, is protect Americans from the abuse of market power.
Becky wants to jump in here, too.
Chair Ferguson, thank you for being with us. I think that clarifies things in a way that I hadn't heard before. And I think that may be where people are coming down on it. Do you look at it, if you see, let's say, woke mentality being put out there, you think of that, there must be a monopoly there, because how else would they be able to alienate 50% of their population? That is very different than what we'd seen before. So if a media company or industry is seen as leaning one way or another, if a technology company or industry is seen as leaning one way or another, you think that it is indicative of a monopoly?
Nope. I'm not going to treat the politics of any particular company as indicative of monopoly. But what I do care about is if companies are degrading their product quality by kicking people off because they hold particular views, that could be an indication that there's a competition problem. And that's what I care about. But it is absolutely not the FTC's job to run around checking the politics of businesses and using that as a proxy for a monopoly. But if companies are degrading their product quality, actively trying to drive away consumers because they aren't suffering competitive consequences, it could be an indication that there are competition problems, and competition problems are my job. But I'm not walking around checking the liens of particular businesses. That's adamantly not my job.
I'm curious about the difference between you and Lina Khan, right? I mean, Lina Khan was kind of a figure of fear on Wall Street and in corporate America. And, you come in and people are expecting an entire sea change here. I'm wondering just how many of the enforcement actions from the Lina Khan era FTC you guys are going to drop or move away from.
Yeah, I wrote hundreds of pages of dissents when I was a Republican commissioner under Lina, and we have big differences. And I think the two main differences are I want to either go to court or get out of the way. A lot of business people have told me that one of the problems they had with the previous FTC was that a merger would go into the agency and it would kind of disappear, and it could languish there for months. And they would get the sense that the FTC's goal was to hope that the markets change, the deal would become unprofitable, and the deal would be withdrawn. I want nothing to do with that. We're going to scrutinize deals the way that Congress told us to scrutinize deals. And if they're illegal, and I think I can win in court, we'll win in court. And if they're not, the FTC is going to get out of the way and let business do its thing. And the second thing is the FTC had a really heavy emphasis under the Biden administration on ex-ante regulation. We passed dozens of rules over the last 4 years, and I voted against the overwhelming majority of them, wrote page after page of dissents on them. I don't see it as the FTC's job to be a regulator. I'm a cop on the beat. I check our markets to make sure there's no fraud, there's no monopolization, there's no collusion. If there is, I act, and if there isn't, I stay out of the way. And, the president has emphasized his deregulatory agenda. That's absolutely going to be one of the priorities of the FTC, is carefully going through all of our regulations, and the ones that are, imposing onerous requirements on businesses and not protecting Americans, we're going to confront them and get them out of the way. And ones that were illegal when they were originally adopted, we're going to take care of those too.